Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." So why don't all countries speak out and have policies, workshops, or allot more money to the issue of human trafficking? UNODC defines human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction for the purpose of exploitation. Once this unforeseen terrible situation occurs, it's the law enforcement's and the country's job to locate the victim. The purpose of our study was to find the relationship between effort and GDP of a particular country. Our data variables included but are not limited to the names of countries, GDP, effort, and tier, which is based on its compliance with standards for the elimination of trafficking. The codebook showed that effort code -1 is given to a country that's government is not making significant efforts to combat trafficking. When the effort code was 0, that means that the country's government is making no effort to combat trafficking. And finally, when the effort code was 1, that means the country was making some sort of significant effort to combat trafficking, or that the government fully complies with minimum standards. We predicted that if a country has a substantially high GDP, we believe there is a strong relationship between the country's efforts to enforce policies regarding human trafficking.
We had GDP in the same Excel sheet as our human trafficking indicators. Our main information here was the country name, the year, and its GDP. And we would have multiple records of the year for the multiple GDPs we would have for each country, and then the rest of our variables for the human trafficking indication. So we'll begin with finding the global correlation, which is here, which compares all of our data from every country with the human trafficking indicators and finds the correlation between everything globally. So to do this, we first come to our HTI worksheet, go to the data tab, open up our data analysis tool and select correlation. From correlation, we'll select all of our numerical data, so not the name of the country, but everything from year down to the dates for which each country signed certain human trafficking data. And we're gonna take the output and have it output to a new worksheet named test. And we have to check this box named labels in first row, or else we're going to get this error right here that says there's non-numeric data, even though there isn't, because it doesn't realize that these labels up here are just labels for our rows. Click OK, and it's loading. Alright, and we finally have our output. As you can see, it's showing the correlations. So GDP's correlation with source and just addition, and so on. But of course, this is way too much data to read through. It would take you a while. So then what we went on to do is come back to the data tab, and I'm sorry, not data tab, from the home tab we went to the conditional formatting and highlighted the top, let's take this entire area, go back to home, and now highlight every cell with green and only the top 5% of correlations. And then within this as well, we're going to go ahead and highlight the bottom 5% so we can see the strongest positive and the strongest negative correlations. In GDP over here, we just see very strong negative correlations with the date of signing a few documents, not much else. There's really nothing else there, but you can see some strong correlations amongst here. We can play around with this so that we can find what the strongest are in GDP. In fact, if we want, we can go just for GDP and highlight the top 10% just within GDP, so we can see what the strongest is in here. Now that we have that, we wanted to create something for just specific countries. So the whole plan was to be able to come here and select the specific country that you want to analyze, say, let's say Portugal. So you select Portugal, and then there would be a start button, which we couldn't figure out how to do. But essentially what would happen is you would click this, let's say the start button is right here. You click the start button, and then the program would automatically come over here to HTI, go down and find Portugal, and it would come over here to data, select data analysis tab, get the correlation, and it would only select all of the data that we have for Portugal. So 303 to 312, come over to the end and just select that data, and then have it output to our GUI tab right here. There's no labels in the first row here, so we're going to leave that. Click OK. It's going to overwrite the existing data, which is OK because that's from Australia. And then we have this. And again, same thing. We'll come over here, and we know from before that GDP is our third tab. Come over here to GDP. Highlight this row and have it highlight the top 10%. So you can see that there's actually a very strong correlation right here. And what we did was we just copied this right here just to make it easier to read and analyze. Now we can see where the correlations are. And if you want to see the bottom again, the weakest correlations, let's say the bottom, not bottom 10 items, we want to see the bottom 10%. So there's actually very strong correlations between the punishment and the GDP, and if they're meeting the minimum standing and the GDP. So interesting, but again, we were unable to finish our GUI, so it still requires a lot of manual work.
The numbers here are the results of our data mining. So the numbers mean a 1 is a perfect one-to-one relationship. A -1 is a perfect none-to-none relationship. And a 0 is neutral. So here we see efforts is a -0.17, meaning that the higher GDP does not correlate to higher efforts made to stop human trafficking. And it's a very weak relationship, so the results are very inconclusive. We also see that higher GDP has a higher correlation with debt bondage being the source in that country. It's a 0.50, which is a pretty strong relationship, so that's semi-conclusive. And we also see that higher GDP correlates to debt bondage transit, meaning the debt is transferable from parent to child, or relocation fees and such. And there's also a semi-weak relationship, but it is a positive one, between higher GDP and forced child labor being the source in that country. And again, there's another semi-weak positive correlation between GDP and the prosecution number for human trafficking related incidents.
Even though our data was inconclusive, we learned a lot from attempting to interpret this data. Through related studies, we were able to compare and learn of successful methodologies used for data mining with human trafficking datasets. If we were to continue or redo our research, we would try to gather a significant amount of data and try to find a data analysis technique that would allow us to make concrete conclusions about the effects of GDP and human trafficking.